Sup? So I think it's time once again, to get a little controversial. So this is from Reuters. This video will have two articles from Reuters. And you know how Russia's basically done more to make peace in Syria than we ever have? Well, there's someone else doing more to help out the Middle East than America ever has. We like to call her Great Britain. Hail Britannia, Britannia rules peace. You see, Britain has been urging Israel to halt settlement expansion, in contrast to the United States, which has done very little. Britain urged Israel to halt its counterproductive settlement expansion on Thursday, saying it was illegal under international law, which it is. The Foreign Office reiterated its position on the settlements after the United States on Monday effectively backed Israel's right to build Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. The position of the United Kingdom on settlements is clear. It said in a statement they are illegal under international law, present an obstacle to peace, and threaten the viability of the two-state solution. We urge Israel to halt its counterproductive settlement expansion. A two-state solution, frequently a liberal position, but you know what? I support it. It would certainly be better than this Israeli superstate, which annexes and does full-on manifest destiny like nobody's business. If that sounds familiar, that's because that's literally how this nation was started. So in a way, the United States government not stopping Israel is technically internally consistent. Say what you will about that, but that is the case. It is internally consistent. To remain internally consistent with preventing Israel, we would literally have to give some of the land we stole back to the Native Americans. And by we, I just mean the government. Modern U.S. citizens obviously took no part in it. They have no agency in it. But technically the government does, since the government is an entity and not a person. It is a legacy which is passed down from generation to generation, much like a country. A country is also a legacy passed down from generation to generation. Therefore, to be internally consistent within that legacy, we would either have to support Israel or give land back to the Indians and to their tribes. Which, by the way, I'd be okay with if we decided to do it. It's like, oh, so Israel can have its land just because Jews lived there once? Supposedly, given if the Bible is accurate, which is debatable. Versus, say, well, if they lived there once, then the Indians lived here once, shouldn't they have their land back? Same logic. But do they have the consistency to say that? No. Not even. Britain is honestly legitimately impressing me with how much they step in to take care of our bullshit. To take care of our government's bullshit. There I go again, saying our. Because it's our government's bullshit. We have no agency in that. The people and the government are two different things. But yeah, it's amazing how the British government will step in to handle our government's bullshit. It's actually very admirable. While it might have been horrible and tyrannical in the past, in many ways it still is, there are certain things which you can admire about the current British state. Absolutely. There's little to admire about Russia, aside from its foreign policy. But yeah. Moving on, as this fight for a two-state solution, which is what I would support, becomes more and more difficult, we are now hearing that old Bennie Yahu has been charged with corruption, says he won't resign. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netenyahu said on Thursday he would not resign despite being charged with bribery, fraud, and breach of trust in a corruption scandal that he denounced as an attempted coup. Excuse me. The charges announced by Attorney General Avichai Mandelblit were the first of their kind against a serving Israeli Prime Minister and represented the gravest crisis in the political career of Israel's longest-serving leader. Netanyahu, in power continuously since 2009, before that in the 1990s, has dominated Israeli politics for a generation, decisively turning the country to the right. He has denied wrongdoing in the three graft cases, saying he is the victim of a political witch hunt. You know, that actually does sound a little familiar. a right wing world leader saying it's a witch hunt. Oh no, that's not relatable to America at all. But he is under no legal obligation to resign. But the indictment could further embolden challengers trying to dislodge him after two inconclusive elections since April, with a third election expected to be announced within weeks. Conviction on the charges could bring a lengthy jail term, but any trial could be delayed for months by the political crisis, and Netanyahu could try to secure parliamentary immunity from prosecution. His rejection of the charges echoed the pugnacious language of his ally, U.S. President Donald Trump. Pugnacious. Real quick, I'm just going to take a look at the definition of that word. Pugnacious. Combative in nature, belligerent, disposed to fight, quarrelsome, given to fighting as a pugnacious fellow, a pugnacious... Okay. His rejection of the charges echoed the pugnacious language. Right, so they're basically coming to the same conclusion I have, that it's a familiar scenario. It is an attempted coup based on fabrications and a tainted and biased investigative process, Netanyahu said in a televised speech. I will continue to lead the country according to the letter of the law with responsibility, devotion, and concern for all of our futures, he said, standing at a podium against the backdrop of 4 Israeli flags in his official residence. His main center-left challenger in the 2 elections this year, Bennie Gantz, tweeted in response, "There is no coup in Israel, just a bid by Netanyahu to hang on to power." The Attorney General, who was appointed by Netanyahu, spelled out the indictment in his own televised statement. "This is a difficult and sad day," said Mandelblit. It was his duty, Mandelblit said, to ensure that no one in Israel was above the law. Well, of course it's a bid by Netanyahu to stay in power. He's a politician. Do not trust politicians. If you trust politicians, you are a fool. Turn your back to a politician. They may feel like they want to stab it. Don't do it. Do not trust. Least of all someone as dirty as Netanyahu. If ever there was a physical manifestation of stench representing Netanyahu's corruption and filth, we could smell him the world over. He's one of the dirtiest politicians I've ever seen. He's right up there with Vladimir Putin and Richard Nixon. The 3 of them would be best buddies if they were contemporary. They'd be best friends. You kidding me? But cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. Police recommended in February that Mandelblit file criminal charges against Netanyahu in the long-running investigations dubbed cases 1,000, 2,000, and 4,000. Netanyahu is suspected of wrongfully accepting $264,000 worth of gifts, including champagne and cigars from wealthy businessmen, and in one case and another he is accused of dispensing favors in return for favorable stories about him in Israel's biggest-selling newspaper, Yedioth Ahronoth. In the most serious case, he is accused of granting regulatory favors worth about 1.8 billion shekels, which is about $500 million, to Israel's leading telecoms company, Bezek Telecom Israel, in return for positive coverage on a website owned by its former chairman. Mandelblit indicted Netanyahu on charges of breach of trust and fraud in all 3 corruption cases, as well as bribery in the Bezek Telecom case. They weren't after the truth, they were after me, Netanyahu said in his address. A note of emotion in what was otherwise a speech mixing anger with accusations. What I'm going through is not easy. I'm a human being, too. What my family is going through is unbearable every day, every evening. My blood and the blood of my wife and son are being spilled. Netanyahu failed to form a government after the election in April, and he and Gantz each fell short of securing a ruling majority in parliament after the second vote in September. So he's saying that the blood of his family is being spilled by the media. comparing it to a violent bloodletting. That almost sounds like some of the language that Trump uses, like calling it a crucifixion. It is a similar scenario, except for the fact that I think they might actually have something on Netanyahu. You gotta understand, Trump is being pursued by a Democratic majority who show clear signs of butthurt, i.e. their petulant, childlike attitude. Yahu's accusers, on the other hand, are fewer in number and are acting far more diplomatically than that. They have a legitimate grievance. But what is the grievance against Trump? Russia, Ukraine. All these wacky conspiracy theories. The left says that conspiracy theories are the realm of conservatism, but that's not true at all. They're just as liable towards believing conspiracies than the conservatives. They're just as liable. In fact, liable is literally like an anagram of liberal. You could easily do that. But early on Thursday, during one of the most unusual days in Israeli political history, the country's president told lawmakers to name a third candidate to form a new government, a development that probably sets the stage for a third election within a year. These are harsh and dark days in the annals of the State of Israel, President Reuven Rivlin said as he announced that Gantz had not mustered enough support for a stable coalition. The prolonged political stalemate comes at a tricky time for Israel and its most prominent statesmen on the domestic and international fronts. A conflict with arch-foe Iran has deepened. Israeli warplanes hit Iranian targets in Syria on Wednesday after rockets were fired toward Israel, while fighting with Palestinian militants in Gaza flared last week. The introduction of criminal charges could further complicate the eventual rollout of a long-delayed Middle East peace plan from Trump, by imperiling the political future of one of the key players whose support is needed. And if a new Israeli election is in the cards, Netanyahu would be running as an indicted suspect, displaying further vulnerability to an electorate that has already seen him falter at the polls. Palestinians greeted the news with grim pleasure. Palestine Liberation Organization official Vassal Abu Youssef said that for years Netanyahu had sought to avoid this outcome by launching wars against the Palestinian people to boost his domestic popularity. But yeah, you want to talk about a corrupt politician? Benjamin Netanyahu had better be on that list, because he definitely belongs there. Again, along with several, if not if only a handful of U.S. presidents. I mean, let's not forget Richard M. Nixon, which his middle name was Milhouse, I believe. And let's not ever forget Lyndon Baines Johnson, who may or may not have hired one of the assassins who shot Kennedy. Vladimir Putin would be on there, since he's has been caught rigging votes before to create an artificial landslide in the Russian election. Bottom line is, you got a list of corrupt politicians, you better bet Netanyahu ought to be on it. And he's on it with a lot of really messed up dudes. But overall, the behavior of the whole state of Israel is just... These people simply cannot behave themselves. I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, the state of Israel, these politicians over there in the Middle East, just cannot behave themselves. They're extremely violent. And all they see is opportunities for power. And the people that are forced to live under them are probably desperate to see an immediate change. I mean, who knows how the actual citizens of Israel feel about it? Someone should talk to them and see how they feel about it. I doubt they feel very good about it. Political corruption in any nation is a problem. Anyway, peace.